I moved into a small apartment complex just outside the city. It wasn't anything fancy, just a cheap place for students, young couples, and people like me who needed something affordable and quiet. For the first couple of weeks, everything seemed normal. I kept to myself, nodded politely to the neighbors I passed in the hallway, and spent most evenings either working late or watching TV with the windows cracked open to let the summer air in. But there was one neighbor I couldn't ignore. He lived right next door, and from the very first time I saw him, something felt off. He never said hello, never made eye contact, and moved with this stiff, almost mechanical way. I figured maybe he was just shy, or one of those people who didn't like small talk. Then I noticed the deliveries. Every night, around the same time, a van would pull up outside the building. The driver never rang the doorbell. He just left a large, heavy-looking package by my neighbor's door, and every night, without fail, the man would wait until the hallway was empty before dragging it inside. That was the strange part. He didn't lift the boxes or carry them. He dragged them, as if they weighed far more than they should. And sometimes, after the packages disappeared into his apartment, there would be faint streaks left behind on the floor. Dark marks smeared across the old tiles of the hallway. At first, I told myself I was overthinking it. People order weird things all the time. But night after night, I found myself listening for the sound of that van, watching from the peephole as another box arrived, and feeling this knot in my stomach tighten a little more each time. Something wasn't right about my neighbor, or what was inside those boxes. After the first couple of weeks, I started paying closer attention. Every night, almost at the exact same time, that van would roll up and another box would appear. It didn't matter if it was raining, if it was late, or if nobody else in the building was awake. Those deliveries never stopped. And my neighbor never spoke to the driver, never signed for anything. He would just peek into the hallway, make sure it was empty, and then drag the package inside. The dragging sound became something I dreaded. That harsh scrape of cardboard against the old hallway tiles, followed by the dull thump as the box crossed the threshold of his door. One night, I came home late from work and caught a glimpse of him pulling one of the packages inside. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach turn. There was a trail behind it. A dark streak smeared across the floor, almost like something wet had seeped out of the box. The smell came next. At first it was faint, just a sourness in the air near his door, but as the days went by, it grew stronger. It wasn't trash or spoiled food. It was heavier, something rancid that clung to the back of my throat. Other tenants must have noticed too, but no one said anything. People in this building seemed to live by an unspoken rule: don't get involved. One evening, I passed by his door and saw that a box had been left outside longer than usual. The van had come and gone, but this time he hadn't pulled it in right away. I slowed down, pretending to check my phone, and glanced at it. The cardboard looked warped, like it had been soaked from the inside. And on one corner, the tape had started to peel back. Sticking out through the gap was something that froze me in place. A scrap of fabric. It looked like part of a shirt sleeve. I didn't sleep well that night. My brain kept looping through possibilities. Maybe it was old clothes, donations, something harmless. But then, why the secrecy? Why the dragging, the stains, the smell? A few nights later, the sound started. At first I thought it was my imagination. Soft, muffled noises coming through the wall. Not talking exactly, but not mechanical either. Like faint movements, occasional thuds, and once, something that sounded disturbingly like a groan. I pressed my ear against the wall, but the noises stopped as suddenly as they'd begun. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. I came home late again, walking down the hallway with only the dim overhead lights flickering every few feet. As I passed by his apartment, I noticed the door. It wasn't shut all the way, just a thin sliver of darkness where it hadn't latched. I should have kept walking, but curiosity, and maybe fear, pushed me closer. I leaned forward, peering through the gap. At first, all I saw was clutter. Stacks of boxes, more than I ever imagined, piled up against the walls. But then my eyes adjusted to the dim light inside. The boxes weren't just stacked. They were opened. Some had spilled contents onto the floor. What I saw scattered across the carpet made my chest tighten. Shoes, different sizes and styles. Purses, jackets, old phones with cracked screens. Things that clearly belonged to different people. The air was thick with that same rancid stench, stronger than ever. And then I noticed one box in particular, half torn open near the couch. From inside, a pale hand hung limp over the edge. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat, and that's when the door creaked wider. He was standing there, his figure blocking the light from inside. His eyes locked on mine, cold and unblinking. For a moment, neither of us moved. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs, I thought I might collapse. Then he took a single step forward. That was enough. I bolted down the hallway, fumbling with my keys, nearly tripping over myself as I slammed into my apartment and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light on, listening for the faintest sound outside my door. I thought I heard footsteps once, slow and deliberate. But when I peered through the peephole, the hallway was empty. My hands shook as I dialed 911, whispering every detail I'd seen. The dispatcher's calm voice didn't match the panic clawing at my chest, but she told me officers were on their way. When the police arrived, I stayed locked in my apartment, only opening the door when I heard them shouting his name. For a few minutes, there was silence. Then came the pounding of fists against wood, the splintering of a door forced open, and the muffled chaos of voices inside. The next morning, yellow tape sealed his apartment shut. Word spread quickly through the building, but no one spoke openly. I only caught fragments from the officers, things about evidence, personal belongings, and missing persons. I never saw my neighbor again. The van stopped coming. His door stayed sealed with tape that read, "Do not enter." And even now, months later, I sometimes wake at night to that sound burned into my memory. The scrape of cardboard dragging across the floor outside my door. When I first moved into my new apartment, I was just relieved to finally have a place of my own. It was a small unit in an older building, nothing special, but it felt like a fresh start. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly families and older residents, and for the first week or so, everything seemed perfectly normal. It didn't take long before I noticed him, the man who lived directly across from me. His window faced mine, just a little higher up, and almost every night I would catch him standing there, looking out into the street. At first I told myself it was nothing. People stare out of windows all the time, maybe lost in thought. But after a while, it became harder to ignore. Whenever I stepped outside to take out the trash, his silhouette was there. When I returned late from work, I'd see the glow of his apartment light and the faint outline of him at the glass. Sometimes I could feel it before I saw him, the weight of someone's eyes locked onto me. I tried not to overthink it, but it started to gnaw at me. Who spends that much time just watching? He never waved, never looked away, never gave any indication that it was an accident. Just stood there. His face barely visible in the shadows. It reached the point where I started keeping my blinds closed, but that didn't ease the unease. If anything, it made me more aware. Because no matter what time I peeked through, day or night, He was always there, watching. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he just happened to be at his window at the same times I noticed. But then the notes began. The first one was tucked under my doormat when I came home from work. It was short, scrawled in hurried handwriting. "Lock your windows." I froze in the hallway, staring at it, my mind immediately jumping to the man across the street. I tried to shrug it off, but a few days later, another note appeared. "Don't walk home alone so late." The paper was folded and left leaning against my doorframe. By the third note, "Be careful. Someone's watching." I was done pretending this wasn't deliberate. My hands shook as I shoved it into my pocket and rushed inside. Every time I looked out my blinds, I saw him there, motionless, in the dim glow of his apartment, his figure framed in the window. My fear turned into anger. What kind of sick game was he playing, watching me every night, and leaving these messages like some twisted warning? I stopped going out after dark, unless I absolutely had to. I double-checked my locks every night, my stomach twisting every time I passed the front window. But no matter how tightly I pulled the blinds closed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being seen. One night I came home later than usual. The air was cold, and the street was nearly silent except for the hum of a street lamp buzzing above. As I approached my building, I saw him again. This time, not at his window. He was standing in the shadows near the edge of my yard, his face just visible under the faint orange glow of the light. My chest tightened, and I froze halfway up the walkway. He didn't move. He didn't call out. He just stood there, like he'd been waiting. Adrenaline shot through me. My keys slipped in my sweaty hand as I gripped them like a weapon. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice breaking. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he took a cautious step forward, his hands raised slightly as if to calm me. "You don't understand," he said quickly, his voice low but urgent. "I'm not following you. I've been trying to warn you." I shook my head, my pulse pounding so loud I could barely hear him. He glanced over my shoulder, then back at me, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Someone's been in your apartment. I've seen him. Not me, someone else." I didn't believe him, not at first. My mind refused to, but the look in his eyes wasn't smug or threatening. It was something else. Fear. Genuine fear. Before I could process what he'd said, a sound came from behind me, a faint creak, like a door hinge shifting. My blood ran cold as I turned toward my darkened apartment, the key trembling in my hand. The sound came again, louder this time. A definite creak from inside my apartment, followed by the unmistakable thud of a footstep. I froze on the walkway, my breath catching in my throat. The man across the street stepped closer, his voice sharp and urgent. "Do you hear that?" he hissed. "You're not alone in there." Every instinct told me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My keys trembled in my hand as I stared at my own darkened doorway. That was my home, my safe place. And yet, the noise had come from inside. Suddenly, the stranger, my neighbor, grabbed my arm. I jerked back in fear, ready to scream, but his grip wasn't violent. It was firm, steady, pulling me away from the door. "You can't go in there," he said. "He waits until you leave, then slips inside. I've tried to warn you." The blood drained from my face. My heart pounded as I finally staggered backward with him toward the street. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my voice cracking as I told the dispatcher that someone was inside my apartment. It felt like forever, but within minutes, red and blue lights flooded the street. Officers rushed past us, weapons drawn, barking commands as they stormed through my open door. I stood in the cold night air, shaking uncontrollably, my neighbor silent beside me. The weight was unbearable. Every muffled shout from inside made me flinch, my stomach twisted in knots. Finally, one of the officers emerged, his face grim. "There's no one here now," he said, "but your place has been gone through." When I stepped inside, my worst fears solidified. Drawers hung open, clothes tossed across the floor, kitchen cabinets left ajar. My bedroom door was half closed, and on the carpet just beyond it, muddy footprints led back toward the window. The lock on that window was snapped clean, hanging loose from the frame. The intruder had escaped. I turned to my neighbor, meeting his eyes for the first time without anger. He looked as shaken as I felt. "I tried to warn you," he whispered. The officers asked questions, dusted for prints, told me to stay somewhere else for the night. But as I packed a small bag, my hands still trembling, the reality sank in. Someone had been inside my home, moving through my things, waiting in the dark. And the worst part? They never found him. Whoever had been slipping into my apartment was still out there, maybe waiting for another chance. I'd lived in the same house for years, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where most of the families kept to themselves. People waved politely when they passed. Kids rode their bikes down the street. And the loudest thing you usually heard at night was a dog barking a few houses away. It wasn't perfect, but it felt safe. Everyone got along fine, except for one man. My next-door neighbor. He wasn't openly hostile, but he had a way of pointing out the smallest things, as if he couldn't help himself. The grass clippings that blew a little too far onto his side of the fence, the trash bin I left out past collection day, even the way I parked in my own driveway. At first, I brushed it off. Some people just like to complain. But over time, I realized it wasn't about everything. It was about my car. Every time I pulled in, he seemed to be watching. If I parked a little closer to the line between our driveways, I'd find him standing outside, arms crossed, making some remark about boundaries. If a friend visited and parked near the curb in front of his lawn, he'd glare until they moved. It became an obsession I couldn't ignore. On a quiet, empty night, I came home late, headlights cutting across the dark street. As I pulled into my driveway, I caught a shape out of the corner of my eye. There he was, standing motionless beside my car, half hidden in the shadows. He wasn't touching it, not doing anything, just staring at it, staring at me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about parking anymore. At first, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe he was just one of those people who needed something to complain about. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore. Every time I pulled into my driveway, I felt his eyes on me. Sometimes he would step out of his house at the exact moment I got home, standing on his porch like he'd been waiting. Other times, I'd catch him lingering by his garage, arms crossed, glaring as I parked. It wasn't just the looks either. He started making little comments every chance he got. "You're too close to the line again," he'd mutter as I walked past him. Or, "You should tell your friends not to park on the curb. It's not for visitors." His words were always clipped, quiet, but dripping with irritation. I started to wonder if he was doing more than just watching. One morning, I found faint scratches along the side of my car. They weren't deep enough to be obvious vandalism, but they hadn't been there the night before. Another time, I noticed footprints in the thin layer of dust on my driveway, prints that circled around the car like someone had been pacing. The worst moment came one night that I'd been half asleep on the couch when a beam of light flickered across my living room wall. I thought it was just a passing car, but when I peeked through the blinds, I saw him. My neighbor was standing in the driveway, holding a flashlight, its beam running slowly along the surface of my car. He bent down, peering underneath, as if he was inspecting it. A cold weight settled in my chest. I wanted to fling the door open and demand to know what the hell he thought he was doing, but something about the way he moved stopped me. He wasn't casual or even angry. Every gesture was measured, precise, like he had done this 100 times before, like a mechanic checking every inch of a machine. I stayed frozen in the dark, watching until he finally shut off the flashlight and slipped back into his house. After that, I started paying closer attention. A few nights later, I caught him again, this time with a camera. He was crouched near the front of my car, snapping pictures with the flash off. The faint click of the shutter carried through the night air, sharp and deliberate. My heart pounded as I realized this wasn't random anymore. He was documenting something. The following weekend, I heard noises outside just after midnight. I crept to the window and saw him kneeling by the driver's side, his hands moving along the door handle. I couldn't see exactly what he was doing, but the sight of him crouched there in the dark sent adrenaline surging through me. I yanked the blinds closed and grabbed my phone, but by the time I worked up the nerve to step outside, he was already back on his porch, pretending nothing had happened. I finally confronted him a few days later when I caught him loitering by my driveway again. My voice shook as I demanded to know what his problem was, why he kept hovering around my car. His expression didn't change. He just stared at me with this cold, flat look and said, "You don't belong that close to my property. Every time you park there, you're crossing a line." I told him it was my driveway, my car, and he had no right to touch it. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Boundaries matter," he said quietly. "People who don't respect them, they pay for it." The way he said it chilled me. It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was calm, almost casual, but heavier than anything I'd ever heard. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about parking. This man had built an obsession around me, my car, and the few feet of space between our houses. And I couldn't shake the feeling that sooner or later, it was going to escalate into something much worse. I woke to a noise just after 2 a.m., a faint metallic scrape that pulled me out of a restless sleep. My first thought was the driveway. Heart pounding, I crept to the window and peeled back the blinds just enough to see. There he was again. My neighbor stood inches from my car, the silver beam of the moon catching on the tool in his hand. I couldn't tell if it was a wrench, a crowbar, or something else, but the way he held it made my stomach knot. He wasn't fixing anything. He was studying it, circling slowly, like the car was his to claim. I threw the door open, my voice sharp and raw. "What the hell are you doing?" He stopped moving but didn't flinch. Slowly, he lifted his head until his eyes met mine across the dark. For several seconds, he just stared, expressionless, unblinking, before the faintest smile crept across his face. No words, no excuses, just that unsettling grin. Then he turned and walked back toward his house, slipping inside without a sound. The silence that followed felt heavier than the confrontation itself. I stood there barefoot in the cold, staring at the shadowed outline of his windows, waiting for something. Anything. But nothing came. I locked my door and sat awake until dawn, watching the driveway like a guard on shift. And the truth is, nothing ever changed. The stares, the late-night appearances, the tension around that strip of concrete between our homes, it never went away. Our dispute was never resolved. And even now, to this day, I still live like this, knowing he's right next door, waiting.